Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you're new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Let me welcome our guest tonight, Larry Johnson. Larry is an American geopolitical commentator and former analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency, USA. Larry, welcome back to India and Global Left. It has been a while.
Yeah, well, thanks. Always appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Of course. Let's start with the 28 points or 20-point peace proposal by the United States to Russia. Um, i- is it a step forward as far as the process of ending the conflict over Ukraine is concerned? Or is it a genuine attempt full of obstacles, or is it a pure bluff?
Uh, I think it's a dead on arrival proposal myself, um, for the simple reason that whether we're talking the 28 point, there are at least two varieties of that floating around. And then we learned yesterday that in the talks in Geneva, it's now down to 19 points. We still don't know what those 19 points are. Um, but you got that. Why are they doing it now? Well, the same reason the West pushed to develop Minsk II back in 2015, because Ukraine was losing on the battlefield. In January of 2015, Ukraine suffered a severe military defeat at a battle called Debaltseve. But that was just one battle. Today, Russia is attacking along 7 to 8 different lines of attack all along this 13 1,000-mile border, 1,300, 1,400 kilometer line of contact that goes north to south. And so this is a panicked attempt by the West to try to get Russia to stop its offensive and say, oh, because the Western side is guided by these false assumptions that Russia is losing uh, too many men, its economy is in terrible shape, and it's looking for a way out. Russia is not looking for a way out; they're winning. So um, Russia is willing to accept to negotiate an end to the war. But one of the things that's out there is that Russia they'll stop. Right now they even though Kherson and Zaporizhia are officially parts of the Federal Republic of Russia. They are like states within that Federal Republic. That Russia will freeze the line of contact. It won't advance anymore, and so it'll leave those two territories in question. That's not going to happen. I mean, the people pushing that are delusional. If if Putin tried to agree to something like that, he would be overthrown. The military, I think, would launch a coup and toss his ass out. He'd be done. I don't see him doing that. So we don't have the details, but what this is another attempt, as was Minsk II, to try to get the Russians to stop before they thoroughly defeat Ukraine, and to buy the West time so they can rebuild the Ukrainian army, rearm it, re-equip it, because they're going to come back. They're going to ultimately attack Russia again and want to destroy Russia. So that's why I think this is just a meaningless exercise.
You mentioned about the West. I wonder, do you see there is any utility in making a distinction between the United States and Europe? Because based on some media report, it seems that, or it does appear to many that the EU is absolutely hell-bent on
Hmm.
sabotaging as much as they can, while the Trump administration is full of, at least appear to be full of people of mixed opinions. Um, is that a useful distinction, or do you think that's not a useful distinction and the United States is not an honest broker? If you could also add a little bit about your visit to Russia, how do people in Russia view the United States and the West? Do they see the US as a honest broker here?
I'd say no. The United States is not an honest broker at all. The United States is the major protagonist in this. This war would not have gone on this long were it not for U.S. direct support, both financially and in terms of intelligence and military support. So, the United States, by virtue of being a nuclear power, however, is someone that Vladimir Putin and his national security team want to treat with caution. They don't want to provoke a confrontation that could escalate and get out of control. They would prefer to have restored normal relations with the United States, as existed during the era of the Cold War. I mean, this is, before you were born, back in the good old days, the bad old days, when the Soviet Union was seen as this international communist power hell bent on conquering the world, and it was this ultimate competition between capitalism and communism. Still, we talked. In fact, the United States and the Soviet Union negotiated arms control agreements. Back then it was called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And then that was subsequently replaced with START. Also negotiated the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and then later the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So when there was the Soviets, we were talking. They had diplomatic relations, not today. I mean, the relationship still diplomatically between the United States and Russia is at best chilly, frosty. It's not a warm relationship at all. And you still can't get a direct flight from the United States to Russia, or the U.S. still has not named a significant ambassador to Russia. I think we still have the deputy chief of mission, the charge and running affairs. So, and the United States illegally seized Russian property that was, like a recreational retreat on the outskirts of Washington. So, the United States, there's a lot the United States can do to try to ease tensions, and it's not doing it. Witkoff has been talking to Kirill Dmitriev. Dmitriev has a lot of experience in the United States, but still, he does not. All he can do is bring back suggestions to the Russian government. He's not an empowered decision maker at all. And, I think the Russian position on a number of issues has been laid out very clearly. I'm curious to see what this agreement that was reached in Geneva. I don't think there's anything that the Ukrainians would agree to that would be acceptable to Russia. I just don't see it. Now, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but Russia's demands are quite clear. At this point, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, that's Russian territory. Ukraine needs to withdraw from all Russian territory, period. No partial withdrawal. Withdraw all. Get out. Remove all NATO presence in Ukraine. Out. And to stop. The CIA is going to have to shut down its operations. But see, this goes beyond Ukraine. And when you get down into the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then the different stands, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, the United States is continuing to mount intelligence operations to subvert those countries, to use them against Russia. The goal is to destroy Russia. I can't emphasize that enough. The United States is not a friendly power with respect to Russia. It's just not.
And NATO supposed to continue in Poland and other parts in Eastern Europe, and also
Right.
the Nordic countries have come in within NATO.
Yeah. Well, you saw, one of the report, the Ukrainian delegate to the Rada released or leaked one version of the 28-point plan, and then it was reported yesterday, day before yesterday, on Sunday, that the European version and the Ukrainian reported version was that Ukraine would get to have a 600,000 man army, and the Europeans said, no, 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 800,000. What narcotic, illegal narcotic, are these people smoking or ingesting? At the outbreak of the special military operation back in February of 2022, I think the total size of Ukrainian ground forces was around 300,000, 280,000, somewhere in there. Yeah, look it up to see, but as I recall, it wasn't. And then when you bring in the reserves, yeah, you might get the reserves up around 900,000 total. Now they want to have a 600,000 man army now. That'd be larger than the armies of Germany, France, and England combined. Back in March of 2022, when Ukraine and Russia had reached a tentative agreement to settle the negotiated end to the war, which would have left Luhansk and Donetsk under the control of Ukraine, but it would have had special protection for the Russian speaking population. They agreed to reduce the army in Ukraine down to 85,000. So there's no way that Russia is going to agree. So, oh yeah, yeah, we'll let Ukraine keep a 600,000 or 800,000 man army. Not going to happen.
And that number, I think, is very important because when I was reading those points, I looked at this clause like the army should be cut down to 600,000. I was like, 600,000? I mean, India has about 1.2 million, and India has 1.45 billion people. I mean, Ukraine
Yeah.
has 40 million people.
No, no,
And
no. Excuse me, I must correct you.
okay,
They used to have 43
40 million.
million.
Okay.
Now they're down to 19 million.
That's half of what it used to be. Yeah, there has been a huge what has been called
Yeah,
as a demographic collapse within
right,
Ukraine,
right.
and I'm glad you corrected me on the latest numbers. I mean, I was aware of this demographic collapse,
Yeah,
but yeah, just to come back to the point is 600,000 out of 20 million people is mind-boggling. And India and China, these are like biggest population, big countries, some of the biggest militaries, and Ukraine has half of them.
yeah.
It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, but roughly it would work out based on the current population size. Would be 5% of the total population would be in the military. That's an incredible number. And I got the my source on the numbers, population wise. I had a conversation while in Moscow with the former prime minister of Ukraine, Azarov is his name, and Mr. Azarov said, he says, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine had a population of around 52, 53 million. He said, when I took office in 2010, he says it was down to like 43 million. But he said today it's 19 million. Now, of that, 19 million, or the previous, 43 million population, roughly about 2 million of those are combat casualties. They're either dead or wounded and unable to return to fighting. 2 million. That's a huge, huge number. So this again, all this entire negotiation was motivated because Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, and the West is trying to save it.
And I suspect the Russian objection is not limited to the number of combatants, but it should also include the ballistic missiles and all other weapon systems and so on that the West is offering to Ukraine. I mean, the proposal itself doesn't mention any of those things in detail. I mean, at least the leaked parts of it that I have read.
Well, the West doesn't have a lot to offer. Let's be candid. Um, they cannot combine the combined production of artillery shells doesn't even match what Russia is producing. They can't keep up on that front. Um, he talked about the possibility of using, they call them long range missiles. They're not long range missile. They're intermediate range missiles, and they could use potentially the Taurus. The concern is if they bring in the Tomahawk cruise missile, that can carry a nuclear warhead, which then Russian planners have to take that into account. And so any of those launched from Europe, if they were launched from Europe or supplied through Europe, would make those countries a target. So this is we're entering the end game of the war in Ukraine. There's some who foolishly believe they can continue like this for another couple of years. No, it won't. Um, what has changed is the growth and of the ground forces in Russia. They now number that are on the ground in Ukraine are over 700,000. Total ground forces within the Russian army right now, 1.5 million. Compare that to the United States. United States Army, 470,000, 450,000 total. And if you add in another 80,000, 90,000 from the U.S. Marine Corps, you're still not even at a half, you're a little over a 500,000. You know, one third the size of what Russia has deployed, trained and deployed. And Ukraine doesn't have the wherewithal to match Russia on any of that. So, and then when we get into different weapon systems, the West is simply completely outmatched, outclassed. Uh, Russia's got 4 variants of hypersonic missiles that travel in excess of Mach 6 and are maneuverable. The United States does, and Europe, they don't have a single one, not one. You got the Oreshnik missile that Russia has developed. You've now got a new cruise missile with unlimited range, the Burevestnik. So, just it's a grim-looking military picture for the West and for Ukraine.
One of those numbers you just said was 450,000 armed personnel for the
Yeah,
US. And I just realized how big is the US military bureaucracy because if one looks at Wikipedia, the numbers are like 2.3, 2.4 million. So I'm expecting that millions of people are there as part of the bureaucracy, the military bureaucracy, isn't it?
yeah. If you're looking at civilians that are employed,
Right.
it's large. If you look at, so you separate it by searching on ground forces, and then you add in the Navy and then the Air Force. So I think once you compile all of that together, I think you'd be over, maybe approaching 1.2 million.
Right.
That's excluding reservists. But when you start talking about can we call up reservists, I think the United States may have upwards of 2 million potential reservists. Russia's got 30 million. Big difference. And that's why this people think it's just a casual term, special military operation, that really doesn't mean anything, but it means a whole lot. What it means is that Russia has not made the decision to fully mobilize. Because if there was a war, they would mobilize, which means they would call up millions of reservists, and the society would be mobilized for war. It's not. Right now, you travel around Moscow or around St. Petersburg or really any of the cities, you wouldn't know there's a war going on unless you went out to the Donbass. And there's not political pressure on Putin to end the war quickly. I didn't see that, and I spoke to the United Party, which is Putin's party. They control like 90% of the legislature, the Duma. But I also spoke with five leaders of the Communist Party, from the top guy, Gennady Zyuganov, and again, they're not agitating to end the war. And I spoke with members of there's another left-leaning party, Truth something, and again, they're not agitating for an end. So Putin is not facing political pressure, and he's not facing economic pressure to end the war, and he's certainly not facing military pressure. So these are sort of the false hopes of the West that they think that Putin's, they've got Putin painted in a corner, and they don't.
I want to just rehash a very important point you made. That is that the United States is continue to expand encircling Russia
Hmm.
in the South Caucasus
Right.
by what is often called in the mainstream media as cutting down Russian influence in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. And as I mentioned, the same story in Nordic and Eastern Europe. Uh,
Hmm.
Given that reality, how does one understand this, the larger picture of this peace proposal? Is it making some kind of uh, exit, like a dignified exit now that NATO has lost this war? Is it just buying time? Is it making another bluff? Like, how does one understand this peace plan? Because part of the New York Times reporting, and they are not obviously being very
Right.
transparent, but they say that we have access to all these 40 or 50 officials and so on. They say that Trump is frustrated about not having a deal. He called in these, the Woodcoffs and the Kushners and Rubios and so on, and there were these secret meetings in Miami, where Kirill Dmitriev was there, and that was followed by Rustem Umerov from Ukraine, who was the national security advisor. So,
Right.
how does one understand these developments? Is it just a theater, or given the larger picture that you have just laid out, that the United States is not ready to uh, withdraw from Russian nose?
No, I think it's largely theater. Um, for this reason, the the U.S. position is still based on a number of false assumptions or false beliefs about Russia. S- Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent genuinely believes that the Russian economy is in real trouble and that they can't continue this war much longer or they're going to collapse. He really believes that. And I'm here to tell you that's garbage. It's not true. The Russians certainly don't believe that or feel that. So, but the U.S. is proceeding based upon that assumption. They really think they've got Russia in a position where they can dictate. The West can dictate terms to Russia, and like if Russia doesn't accept our peace plan, well, we're going to hit them with sanctions. Russia does not care. That's the thing the West is failing to understand. One of the leading voices in Russia on the political side has been Sergei Karaganov. And I was fortunate to spend 3 days with Mr. Karaganov in different settings. And he's been a longtime advocate that Russia's future lies in the East. It lies in Asia, Eurasia, Siberia. It doesn't lie in Europe. And so this in the past there were significant voices within the Russian government and Russian society that wanted to have close relationships with Europe. But now you got to step back and say, why? Why have any relationship with Europe? There's nothing in Europe that Russia needs. What what benefit is there to Russia having a relationship with Europe other than it could be a market that they could sell their oil and gas to? But we've already seen that the Europe has said, oh, they want to break all ties with Russia. And, if, for anybody that's ever been in a toxic romantic relationship, you know, if you had a toxic boyfriend or a toxic girlfriend, there comes a point where you realize you got to separate, you got to get away from them because they're bad for your health. They're potentially dangerous. They're crazy. Well, that frankly is how Russia's starting to view Europe as a toxic former partner that, somebody that there's no basis of trust to continue a relationship. So, I don't doubt that maybe Mr. Witkoff genuinely believes he's working on a serious peace proposal. But the deep state has got other objectives in mind, and this is just to buy time, get Russia to stop the offensive, get Russia to not defeat Ukraine militarily, not humiliate NATO, and buy time so they can rebuild and start this whole thing again. They're not going away. I can't emphasize that enough.
I guess there was an op-ed piece in Moscow Times or somewhere that headlined something like the West doesn't understand that Russia doesn't need economic incentive for this to end the conflict. What
Mm.
Russia wants is a political solution, and
Yeah.
that's part of what you're saying. Because when you think that we can either use sanctions as a coercive tool to get Russia to accept what it doesn't want, or yeah, or give them these uh, temptations of investments and trade. I think that's missing the bigger picture. Um, what do you think is coming to? Okay, what do you think is the division between the US and Europe regarding their Russian strategy? Is it just about um, whose taxpayers' money would subsidize the US military industrial complex? Is it merely that, or is there something more deeper than that?
No, I think this is. Uh, I think at least let's differentiate between the leadership in Europe and the population, the people. Uh, I think the majority of people, whether we're talking in the UK or France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, all the populations generally are opposed to a conflict with Russia. They would generally want to see at least normal relations. It's the leadership that are pushing for the conflict, and one of the elements I'm sure is financial. There is they are profiting off of this. Let's take Kaya Kallas for example, out of the Estonia. This at, at least 38 billion, and I think that actually the number was closer to 48 billion dollars, not million, but billion with a B, has been stolen out of the $360 million in aid that Ukraine has received over the course of the last, 46 months. And that money flowed through banks in the Baltics, in Estonia. And then that money went through there, came out, and has been deposited in offshore bank accounts, some in the Caribbean. And some of that money's made its way into the pockets of members of the U.S. Congress, senators and representatives. It's also made its way into the hands of politicians, political leaders in Germany, France, the UK. So there's really been a financial incentive to keep this war going, number one. I think number two, the European leaders, they want to figure out a way to keep the United States hooked, where the U.S. has to stay in Europe. Because as long as the U.S. is there, then Europe basically can freeload off of the U.S. defense spending. Even though they make commitments to spend 5% of their GDP, most are not in a position to do that at all. So, I think those are sort of the two priorities. They create this myth that Russia is an aggressive imperial power keen on conquering Europe. Russia just wants to be left alone and wish the Europeans would keep their hands to themselves.
And what do you think is the larger implication of this NATO's defeat in Ukraine? I'm asking this because there is this larger context where the West is seeing multiple defeats.
Mhm.
Clearly, the US self-imposed tariff wars on China went miserably wrong.
Hmm.
Even the mainstream
Yeah.
press are saying that the US lost miserably. Their whole facade with the Zionist empire has been punctured because how live streamed this genocide was. And then the whole economic stagnation and decline in both United States and the West. Uh, what is the larger implication of this defeat about the future of Western Empire?
Well, there's no reason for NATO to exist. NATO is built on a lie, on a complete fallacy. And that fallacy is that Russia is an aggressive empire keen on conquering the world and taking control of Europe. It's just a lie. NATO, the real reason NATO exists, and the reason the United States repeatedly refused to let Russia become part of NATO is, by God, we got to have a Russian threat and a Chinese threat in order to justify $1 trillion plus defense budget. Because you got to have an enemy, and that war on terror, that's not enough of an enemy to justify spending hundreds of billions of dollars on buying, useless military equipment, jets that don't work, and ships that are no longer relevant or vulnerable. But by God, we got to have a reason for it. That's NATO's only reason to just keep up the facade, the lie that Russia is the threat. We pushed that lie. That lie was even pushed after World War II, after the end of the Great Patriotic War, where they always said, "Oh, the Soviets are going to come crashing through the Fulda Gap in Germany and to take over Europe." Russia never had any intention of doing that at all. It's just a Western manufactured lie.
And do you think the elites would be pressured from the population in the US, given across the political spectrum in the US? There is a great resentment about the corruption within the military industrial complex
Hmm.
between about the relationship, about how taxpayers money go into the pockets of the four or five defense contractors, how the bureaucracy eats up a lot in commissions and so on. So given a huge resentment among the population that cuts across the political spectrum, do you think there would be any impact of that on the machine, the war machine?
Yeah, ultimately, it's going to run out of gas. Donald Trump has really damaged himself severely with his base. They voted, they thought, for someone that was going to clean up the corruption in Washington. Instead, Trump is just like one other pig at a feeding trough. He's lined up to feed himself and his family with their crypto business and has not fulfilled his promises to end the war in Ukraine, to end the wars. Instead, he's agitating to fight new wars. He's already carried out an attack on Iran. He's threatened, got this massive buildup underway off the coast of Venezuela. He's authorized the murder of unarmed fishermen, claiming that they're drug traffickers. I mean, the entire thing's a lie. But so far, what we've seen is the corruption that is endemic in Washington. It's produced sort of at this point a frustration among the average voter to just alienate them to the point that they say, well, we're just not going to vote anymore.
One final question. Given what has happened in Ukraine, what should people in Taiwan learn from this? I'm asking this because
Yeah.
there has been massive escalation on the Taiwanese Strait. The Chinese are very clear that the civil war has to end, but it has to be on terms of one China.
Yeah.
And all this Japanese escalation at the instigation of the United States or the US instigation to push Taiwan as an independent state will not be tolerated by the PRC. So, what are the lessons for people in Taiwan, or I should say, part of the leadership in Taiwan, the DPP party in particular? What are the lessons in store given what we've seen in Ukraine?
Don't trust the West. Don't trust the United States. Don't believe in the promises. They never deliver. You know, when you hear the expression, "Hey, we got your back," I'd worry about what they're doing to my backside. The United States made a commitment 53 years ago to China to recognize that there was one China and that Taiwan was not a separate independent country, that it's part of China. Now we're pretending like we didn't make that agreement. Well, we made that agreement, and China is going to insist upon it being upheld. I do not see China using military force to retake Taiwan. They won't need to. Through their economic power, they will retake Taiwan. I see that. So, what we're looking at here is, again, one other effort by the West to subvert and control the international order. The so-called international rules-based order. We make the rules, and everybody else has to follow them, and we can change those rules whenever we want. So, right now we're saying, oh, Russia should not be rewarded for violating the borders of Ukraine. But meanwhile, hell, we have a happy time in Syria bringing in an actual extremist that chops heads off to put it in charge of the country. No problem there. The same with happened in Iraq, same in Afghanistan. So, the West just we make it up. When it suits us, we do it. If it doesn't suit us, we oppose it. The hypocrisy is just staggering.
One final question I forgot actually. The Of course, Keir Starmer and others are trying to blackmail Russia by through its frozen assets. Macron included, who says that it's up to Europe about how to use it. But even the
Hmm.
Trump's plan says that part of that frozen, in fact, the stolen asset. I mean, frozen is euphemizing,
Yes.
but this
Yeah.
part of the stolen asset would be used to build up Ukraine. We haven't seen the Russian response because there hasn't been any official response to the plan. But what do you think would be the Russian response to this kind of use of stolen assets to rebuild Ukraine?
Well, actually, I think they did respond the other day. I don't have the exact source to quote you right now, but my understanding is the Russians said, "All right, we've identified over $300 billion in assets that are owned by foreign companies here in Russia. You seize ours, we'll seize yours. It's that simple." Yeah, Trump's plan on paper says you immediately take 100 billion of the $300 billion in Russian assets and spend it on rebuilding Ukraine, and then the U.S. with Russia would, spend the other 200 billion in a joint investment. Russia's not going to agree to that. It's our money, they'll say. Not your money, it's our money. So either give it back and then we'll call it and we'll leave all these other assets here in Russia alone, or you seize that, we'll seize these, and we'll pay ourselves out of these assets. Russia's not going to be bullied. That's, they've, the West is confusing patience with weakness, and the Russians are not weak.
We'll leave it there, Larry. This was a interesting conversation as always, and has been after a while. Thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you again soon.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.